Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Gavin, Schall, Alex Wolfe, and we are back with our first mailbag of 2022. Alex, what are we going to get into in this new year?
Yeah, we've got a lot to get into. I mean, first off, we're going to give it a lot of time. Lots of people were concerned with what is the path forward for this Knicks team, and rightfully so. I think we asked this for the Raptors game, but even with a good game in between, not too much has changed about what's the direction of this team. So we're going to talk about that first and give that a lot of time. And then a couple silly questions, talk about Bing Bong, the origins, why it stinks. Spoiler alert, I think it stinks. And also talk about who can come close to touching Patrick Ewing's sweatiness on the court, which he was a rare breed as far as sweat goes. So we'll talk about that next in this edition of the Locked On Knicks mailbag.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. We want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. We are now available on all platforms, including, and you know this if you see our beautiful faces, on YouTube. So please go throw us a subscription if you haven't already. And today's episode is brought to you by Truebill. Truebill is the new app that saves you money by helping you identify and stop paying for the subscriptions you don't want or need, and can even negotiate better deals on those you want to keep. I am Gavin Schall, a play-by-play broadcaster heading to Springfield, Massachusetts. I just booked my Airbnb to broadcast the Hoop Hall tournaments of the best high school teams in the country. Check that out from January 13th to January 17th. He is Alex Wolfe, editor-in-chief of the Strickland, the greatest Knicks website on the internet, that just got a rare gift, a Benji Ritholtz game recap. So if you haven't checked that out, please go and do so. And now a rare gift for all of you, a mailbag. We try to do them monthly. We don't always get to them monthly, but with 2022, we thought we would get one in. So as Alex alluded to, the first four questions were essentially all on the same theme. How do the Knicks proceed at this point? So I'll rip through them real quick. So you get a feel for what everyone wants to know. JVG's Civic at JVG's Civic asked, what is the best path forward for this team? Trade Randall. What the hell do we do with RJ's extension coming up this summer? Feels like a lot of questions, and tearing it down again might be the best bet. Lacage, great friend of the show, at Lacage. Have we hit the breaking point where draft positioning makes more sense than fighting for the play-in, even with the team whole? And if we trade for, say, Miles Turner, what are the chances this team gets to 42 to 45 wins? My worst fear, out of play-in and picking 12th. Happy New Year, Alex and Gavin. Happy New Year, Matt Motram wants to know, at Matt Motram, time to blow things up, or what's the plan? Can you talk through both options and how they play out the next few years and beyond? Steve Thomas at DarkSteve590 asked, at what point do the Knicks start trading off quote-unquote assets in order to assess the rest of the roster? So, Alex, pretty clear what the people want to know. How do the Knicks move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think I alluded to this on our last show, but I feel like my opinion of this changes almost daily. This was asked, these particular questions I think came in right after the Raptors game, because we just kind of generally said oh, what do you guys want us to talk about? And we took a couple things out of that. I think we talked about potentially trading Burks and stuff like that on that show, because we were like, well, we need to talk about something. And clearly the game wasn't worth talking about. Then of course, you have the game against the Pacers, and makes you start to reassess, oh wait, look, Julius and RJ both scored 30 points. How cool is this? So, I think that, I guess maybe if we were going to tackle the first part of the question, or the first part of this multifaceted, four-headed question here, is the RJ and Julius part. So, RJ Barrett is up for an extension after this offseason, or the end of this coming offseason prior to next season, and could potentially get paid, I think, up to around $150 million if he gets his full rookie max deal, which would be roughly pay him $30 million a season. I think that's about the deal that Michael Porter just got. Luka Doncic, obviously, I think he got more because Luka was able to get more because of his Derrick Rose rule achievements with, getting on NBA teams and stuff like that, all-star teams, all that good stuff. Same with Trae Young. But, RJ could potentially negotiate I think up to $150 million extension. I don't know at this point if I feel super comfortable giving him a full rookie max. And so that's probably the first part. Gavin, where do you fall as far as that's concerned? Like, I just think it's really going to depend on how RJ closes out this year. And I feel like that sort of is the case for a lot of the guys on this team as far as what's their standing going to be going forward. Like, Mitchell Robinson is going to be an unrestricted free agent. RJ has his extension coming up. Kevin Knox is going to be Kevin Knox doesn't matter so much, but he'll technically be a restricted free agent. We're gonna have to start thinking about these guys sooner than later, and those two in particular, I think, are really big to look at for the rest of this year, and what the Knicks decide to do with them could have pretty big bearings on what they end up doing as far as addressing this core going forward.
Yeah, I think RJ's, pretty obviously the most fascinating one, because do you want to get into a scenario right a year from now where he would be a restricted free agent a year from now if they don't give him the extension, right?
Yeah, he would. Yeah, so he
Yeah.
would hit restricted free agency.
Yeah.
If
So
they
do
don't,
you,
and
so
they have to extend him before next preseason begins, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So I think typically with a surefire thing as a rookie, that would be an extremely undesirable scenario. And I think the Knicks, to attempt to avoid that, they will try and lock RJ in on a fairly team-friendly deal, assuming we get essentially what we've gotten this year. But or let me rephrase that. Assuming we get essentially what we got last year from RJ for the rest of the season, right? Which I think is probably the most realistic expectation, that the 3-point shooting ticks up a bit, probably not to the levels it was at last season. The 2-point efficiency is a career best, but he's not doing every night what he did last night. And you have a player that looks like someone who can be a solid contributor on a good team, if not ultimately a superstar. And what's a reasonable contract for a guy like that who's still very young, who has the pedigree of RJ Barrett? I don't know. Is it 18 million a year? Is it, $20 million a year? If you're being a little bit generous to RJ and you're betting on future growth, sure, I'd be perfectly content if assuming he continues on the recent trend, which is only 3 games long, of positive play, of locking him into something like that. I have a feeling RJ Barrett will want more than that. And I have a feeling that the conversation will extend into another season. And next year, RJ will say, I'm going to bet on myself. And the Knicks will be like, all right, cool, go for it. And RJ will see if he can make a real leap, because a lot of us thought that was going to happen this year. I think at this point, that is a long shot, unless what we saw again the last 3 games was a lot more real than we thought. But I think if the leap is going to come, it'll be a year from now. I think RJ will not want to lock himself in. I think he will want to bet on that leap. I think the Knicks will ultimately be okay with that and say, if you're that good, we're okay paying you that kind of money. And I think that's where this ultimately ends up.
Yeah, I think so too. And, I think we already have evidence out there to say that the Knicks are okay with, paying guys what they're worth, and I'm sure that some of the players on the team have noticed that. Like, Nerlens Noel has a great year last year, and then the Knicks, for better or worse, going into this year, nobody could have predicted that Noel was going to have a bum knee this year. But Noel, for better or worse, has, been paid for playing well, and Alec Burks, same deal. He hadn't had a long-term home in forever. And, he plays well for the Knicks on a 1-year deal. They re-up him and pay him what he's worth. And so, they'll probably come to RJ and his agent with an honest assessment of what they think he's worth this offseason, sort of like what was reportedly sort of on the table with Mitchell Robinson. It seems like they at least made some sort of offer that Mitch and his camp said, nah, we'll see how things go this year. That one was a little different because the timetable is different. So really signed an extension to the start of free agency at the end of this year, whereas RJ's, because being on a rookie scale contract, has to be figured out by October for that to work. So, I think that I think we will see a situation where RJ's going to, probably bet on himself next year. I agree with you with that. I think that the Knicks will come with an offer depending on how much he shows out to end this year, and say, okay, this is what we think you're worth. And he's going to be like, well, I think I had a down year last year for, all kinds of reasons. So I want to play out this year and hit restricted free agency. I don't think there will be any animosity about it. It seems like the organization loves RJ and RJ loves the organization. So hopefully, that they'll be able to just kind of approach it professionally. And then, at the end of next year, just be like, all right, RJ, like, maybe the Knicks pull the Jeremy Lin thing and say, look, like, obviously we can't come to an agreement here. So go find a team that has an offer for you and we'll match it, or something like that. And, there's a lot of different ways that this can work and still work out professional for everybody. So it's, I think that's how it's going to go probably. But Gavin, we could probably move to the question of Julius Randle here. But did you want to let everybody know about Truebill real quick?
Yeah, I wanted to move to the question of getting off of bad subscriptions and saving a whole lot of money, Alex. Do you know why free trials renew without your consent? It's a business scam out to get you. Don't let greedy corporations pocket your money. Download Truebill to take control of your subscriptions. Truebill is the new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. On average, people save up to $720 a year with Truebill. Because companies make subscriptions hard to cancel, Truebill makes it incredibly simple. Just link your accounts and Truebill will cancel your unwanted subscriptions in one tap. And your Truebill concierge is there when you need them to cancel unwanted subscriptions so you don't have to. Truebill has over 2 million users and helps save them over $100 million. Like Matthew B., who says, in a matter of seconds, I saved $660 on the year on my DirecTV bill, saved $120 on the year on my Sirius XM bill, saved $840 a year on my car insurance. So don't fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Go right now, Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. It could save you thousands a year. Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. And with that, we are back on Locked On Knicks. And as you mentioned, Alex, one of the elements of this questions was, do we trade Randle? And to me, that gets into, I think all the other parts of this question in terms of what the Knicks' guiding principle is going forward. And to me, and I've said this a couple of times throughout the year, my ultimate goal is to not end up like the Orlando Magic for the last decade, right? I don't want to be on the treadmill of mediocrity. And I know, and a lot of people have pointed this out, the treadmill of mediocrity is a whole lot better than what the Knicks have been for the last 2 decades, which is the treadmill of bad, but not bad enough. So there's a rewarding element to it. It is a step forward, but you got to make the next step as a franchise at some point. And maybe that even means going backwards, but there has to be a path forward that does not include winning 41 games every single year, on and on and on, and that never changing. So how do the Knicks actually go about doing that? You trade for a star, you sign a star, or you draft a star. Generally, that's how a team goes from mediocre to good. You can even look at Orlando, who's now sort of back there, but at least now they have a young core where they have somewhat of a promising future, when previously it was this team led by Nikola Vucevic that really just had no upside. At least with Franz Wagner, there's something to build around there. So, Alex, I looked at the teams around the NBA that have made that jump, and I was trying to look for commonalities, right? To me, the Grizzlies, the Cavs, and the Bulls are the chief 3 examples of teams that went from bad, or in the case of or average, or in the case of the Cavs, bad to really good to amazing this year. And the commonalities were high level, like lottery talents, right? For the Grizzlies, Ja Morant. For the Cavs, it was Evan Mobley and Darius Garland. And then just fantastic roster construction after hitting on those top 5 picks. And for the Grizzlies, that included a whole lot of guys, right? Desmond Bane, Dylan Brooks, Brandon Clark. You can go on and on and on. Basically, the Grizzlies fit on every pick for a few years. So that almost seems impossible. Morant, I think, was like a uniquely special, not uniquely special, but the rare top 3 pick that is genuinely lived up to the billing and more. Like he's going to be a perennial top 5 to 8 player in this league. The Cavs might have gotten the same thing with Mobley. They got a really good piece in Garland, and then they pulled off this Jarrett Allen trade that basically no one expected. And to me, that's one of the other common threads of all these teams, like pulling off the move that in retrospect looks sort of insane, that they just got Jarrett Allen, who's an all-star this year for a late first-round pick. The Bulls are probably the most optimistic / realistic path forward for the Knicks, because they basically had this a very similar core to New York a year ago. Weren't even as good as New York a year ago, and then they just improved through free agency and signing mid-tier free agents. Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, Alex Caruso. There's a world where the Knicks had that same offseason. So maybe the Knicks, and I think just from the young guys on the roster, the Knicks could find a Caruso, they could find Alonzo. The question is, where do you get your DeRozan? I was looking through 2022 free agents. DeAndre Ayton was the name that jumped out to me as the guy who might be sort of underappreciated and could come out and be that type of star on, if not a fantastic deal, one that is just feasible for the Knicks to get, obviously in a very different way than DeRozan is. But Alex, I was curious your thoughts on all of that and what the Knicks' path forward is to jumping from mediocre.
Yeah, I'm not. So as far as what path the Knicks could take, I don't necessarily know if their path is that different from like the Grizzlies or the Cavs if RJ Barrett works out. And that's obviously a big if, but you mentioned like a top 3 pick, Evan Mobley and Ja Morant probably are on a different level than RJ, but I think that him getting, say, to like a Darius Garland level as far as impact is not completely out of the picture. We've obviously seen some great performances from him this year, in the Pacers game most recently, but then in the earlier stretch of the season, and then he just had that slump, which, for one reason or another, there's been a or he is not feeling his best or something, but I don't know exactly what the cause is, but if he can start finding that level of play more, and obviously we've already talked about his contract and everything else so far in this episode, like he is the most important piece to what the Knicks can do going forward, because if he's the real deal, you can start building, basing your team building strategy more like the Bulls, for example, which I think is probably still the best example of how the Knicks can make this work going forward. I don't think they have any like unmovable contracts on the team. I think that Evan Fournier, for as much as his contract kind of stinks at this point, based off how he's played, I think that contract is still movable. You might have to attach a pick or something to it, but I think you can move it. And that would allow you to take another stab at trying to find your DeRozan or whatever, like you noted in the show notes for this, like it was Fournier their attempt at a DeRozan, and the answer is probably yes. So I think that that's their way forward. I think free agency, hitting on their mid-round picks of the draft, which they've already done with Quickly and Grimes and, Toppin and round pick. I mean, I think that their draft record speaks for itself. I think that if you want to just find that other star, it's probably going to take free agency or a trade. And how good RJ Barrett is goes a long way in determining all that, because, you might decide that you want to trade him to, produce a star. You might decide that you want to handle because RJ, that you want to pair a different star with him. You might decide that you want to keep both of them and put everybody else on the table to find that third star or whatever between the three of them. But really, RJ has to show that he can be a consistent star level talent. And that's sort of the big difference maker here for me, I think, as far as, what this team can do going forward and how they can get better. But Gavin, I'll let you rebut that, and then we can get to our final few mailbag questions here. But I just want to let everybody know that today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. It's the new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours is about getting fit or eating healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easier to stick to your resolution because it tastes so good, you'll want to eat it, unlike other protein bars, which can be chalky or waxy or taste like a chemical spill. You want to eat healthy, but it just gets so boring. By like week 3, you might be thinking, this is just not worth it. Where's the chocolate? Well, good news. Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, as well as containing just 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and 4 grams of net carbs, compared to a huge 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. And that's without even getting into all the fat and other bad things that are in regular candy bars. So even if you're not a huge fan of working out, you can at least eat something that tastes good and is good for you. That way, when you enjoy a delicious Built Bar, you can almost count it as a workout. And there's so many great flavors to choose from: coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, raspberry cookies and cream, salted caramel, mint brownie, and many more. In fact, Built is always coming out with new limited time flavors, so check Built.com often to see what's new. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 and you can get 15% off your order today. Again, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, Gavin, I'll throw it to you to give your take. You sort of just introduced the situation as far as other good teams, but what do you think is the path for the Knicks better and the path they should take going forward with this team?
Yes, I think I think I hinted at it with finding someone like Ayton, or you gotta, if there's one person in the draft that they fall in love with, I wouldn't mind them going all in on someone. And we've seen, I mean, sometimes that works out really well. Sometimes it doesn't. Like look at the Pelicans a few years ago. I mean, when they or I mean, I guess they did the inverse of this where they had the number 4 pick. They could have gotten Darius Garland, they could have gotten DeAndre Hunter, and instead they sort of bailed out of it and traded back and ended up with Jackson Hayes, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and really like a whole bunch of nothing. So really, I want the Knicks to be on the other end of their equation. I want them to find, I mean, DeAndre Hunter has sort of been a mixed bag for Atlanta, but I want them to find their version of that guy in the draft. Maybe it's someone like Jaden Ivey, and just someone to go all in on and say, hey, this is the third guy here that could really complement RJ and Julius. And then I think you're setting yourself up to be a little bit closer to a Bulls situation where all of a sudden you're maybe a couple of smart signings away, right? Because that's basically what the Bulls did. They didn't really outbid anyone for any of those. Maybe DeRozan. Maybe there were other teams competing for DeRozan. I'm sure there were a couple other teams who sort of wanted Lonzo, but it wasn't because they could outspend everyone. It wasn't because they were the most attractive destination. They just made a bunch of like really smart mid to high tier signings. And for the Knicks, maybe the equivalent of that is, again, you make the trade for that guy and then you go all in on someone like DeAndre Ayton. And now is Ayton the perfect third piece for Randall or RJ? Not really, but I don't think there is a perfect third piece for Randall or RJ because there's not really, unless you're talking about the top like 5 guys in the league who the Knicks are never going to get, there's not a person you could plug in here and just say, oh, okay, all of it makes sense now. All of a sudden, Randall's the second banana and RJ is clearly the third banana. Like that guy is not really attainable. So I think you just have to go to like, how can you get to good? And then I think the premise of this whole thing that Leon Rose is building is once we get to definitively good, the final piece, whatever that is, whether that's a mega star or a 4th or 5th really good player, if you're going more so the Phoenix model and saying, hey, like we're gonna win because we have balance and depth, not necessarily because we have a top 3 or 4 player in the league. That guy will find his way here if we are good enough. And to me, that is the cleanest path for the Knicks. It's making an improvement through your own maneuvering and then counting on New York to do its thing and attract a star once you're good enough to be worthy of that guy. But Alex, I think we can get into our final 2 questions here. This one comes from Relo1K at Relo1K wants to know, what are your thoughts on the superstition behind Bing Bong? I see fans say it's cursed, yet we lost a bunch of early games in last year's City Edition jersey and no one said anything. Alex, I revealed to you before the show that obviously just by being on the internet for the last few months, I was aware of Bing Bong, but I didn't know the origin of Bing Bong, and I just never cared enough to really look into. And you gave me sort of the full superhero story for Bing Bong before we started.
Yeah. So first off, with the analogy in there about the City Edition jerseys too, I also hated those even when the Knicks started with them last year. So as far as all this stuff is concerned, but. If the City Edition jerseys from last year were considered cursed too, then cool, because I didn't like them. But I love this year's City Edition jerseys. But the whole Bing Bong thing, for anyone that, is unaware of where the Bing Bong thing happened, is from this show called Side Talk, which is like it's a 1-minute like man on the street reporter show. That they do all over New York. It's maybe a smidge problematic at times. I don't know. I mean, some people have been like, it's a little messed up that like sometimes they're clearly going up to like homeless people or or perhaps people with mental illnesses or whatever, and sort of exploiting them for views on the internet. But some of the videos have been just wholesome New York content where you just have New Yorkers talking and just being New Yorkers for small clips at a time. But basically in every single one of those videos, because once Side Talk started getting some notoriety and people started knowing what it was when they were coming up to them, you'd always get one person in every video that would go bing bong because it's the subway sound. And so, that happens in every Side Talk video. The thing is that was, the video after the Celtics win was a lot of people's first exposure to those videos. And so the guy who said bing bong, said it just because he recognized Side Talk and was like, oh, bing bong. But then all the people that had never seen a Side Talk video before were like, how random. What is this? What does this guy say? Why is he saying bing bong in the middle of a video? And decide to turn it into like a whole, meme or whatever. And good for them. But yeah, I just always found it to be stupid because I was like, why are we freaking out about this? Like, literally there was a video last year on the Knicks by Side Talk after the playoffs, the F Trae Young video. And I'm pretty sure someone said bing bong in that one too. And nobody went crazy for it. So I always thought it was stupid, but that's the story of bing bong. Do I believe in the curse of bing bong? Yeah, I believe in it insofar as it got bing bong to leave the Knicks, fan vernacular. And got people to be like, oh, it's cursed, so we can't say it anymore. I'm like, good, whatever it takes, just get that stupid saying out of the Twitterverse for me. It was just providing such an easy path to get dunked on. Like, it was just like for a month afterwards, you had to deal with every time the Knicks lost, which was plenty in that month after the whole thing took off. Like, just every single other team's social media account making cringy bing bong tweets and crap, and it's just annoying. So yeah, I'm glad to see it's dead. The Side Talk videos, some of the problematic stuff aside, are generally pretty fun. So keep it alive for that, I guess. And maybe stop like sort of exploiting homeless people and mentally ill people as much. But like, the overall premise of the bing bong thing, as far as the Knicks are concerned, like, good, rest in peace, I guess, or don't rest in peace. I don't care. I'm just glad it's gone.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I don't really. I'm happy to have never really had any thoughts on bing bong. All right. One final question from Howard Bunsis at H Bunsis. This was during the I think this was during the Raptors game. He said the Knicks, I think it was during the Pacers game. He said the Knicks are 16 for 21 inside the arc and 4 for 18 from 3. Maybe go inside more. 5 minutes for Obi. Maybe he meant 5 more minutes for Obi after 45 last game. Oh, that was it. Obi was barely playing. Can we trade Fournier? Alec is not a point guard. More Deuce. So a lot there, Alex. I think we can start off by addressing the Fournier point, which we are going to get into more in part 2 of this mailbag. And to me, this is sort of a question of like, how do you want to ultimately sort out the bench and what do you want to do with it? And like, do you move Fournier there? Do you move off Fournier entirely? I think Fournier will not get traded this season. I would be really surprised. I think the Knicks are going to try and do everything possible to rehabilitate his value, because right now you probably have to attach something to him to get him out. Again, something we'll get into more deeply next show. Alec is not a point guard. I agree with that, though. I think it worked out sort of well at least last game against the Pacers, that he was playing there, because it gave RJ a chance to get a whole lot of reps on the ball and get into a really good rhythm. So if RJ can continue that, that would be nice. But I agree, in a long-term sense, we had the Alec Burks at point guard experiment. It didn't really work. And then more Deuce. I think we've sort of seen some of the limitations of Deuce the last couple of games in that he will have some fantastic moments. But like any young player, I think, especially one who was a second round pick, there's still like a pretty steep learning curve, and the shooting isn't quite as consistent as you would want it to be at. I love when he's out there on the floor, but I think he's been an interesting case where Tibbs has been clearly pretty reticent to play him long minutes just because he doesn't really bring a lot of creation right now at the point guard spot, or at least an ability to break down a defense consistently. And the Knicks sort of desperately need that, especially with Kemba Walker out.
Yeah, I mean, to just get into the grand point of like the early. So yeah, I agree with all the stuff about the guards, and we will get into Fournier more in the next show, so we don't have to get into that right this second. But the as far as getting inside more, yeah, obviously I think that's key, and we saw Julius and RJ getting inside more, in the Indiana game, and the benefits that presents, even against an elite rim protector like Miles Turner. They managed to find a way to score inside. And I think that's what we're going to have to see going forward if this team wants to really, really get somewhere. That their identity can't be the team that shoots, 53s a game like the, whatever, like 2017, 2018 Houston Rockets. That's just not who this team is. They don't have that level of three-point shooting talent, clearly, that can do that on a consistent basis. And they don't have like a James Harden that is breaking the defense down to that extent that you have just wide open looks all the time from three. So start taking advantage of the big bodies on the team and setting screens, getting inside. That's going to be the key for success. That's obviously what gets RJ going. And I think whether he wants to admit it or not, that's what gets Julius going too, is, just seeing the ball go through the hoop a few times, sort of finding his rhythm. And then, from there, once he gets a few points on the board and things start feeling good, then he starts busting out the mid-range bag, and then it's game over for the other team, like we saw the other day. So I think that's definitely the way to go. One last question comes from Paul Jeffrey III at Paul the Great 9. This is a silly one, Gavin, but we'll give some quick answers here. I've watched a lot of basketball going back to 1987. Have either of you ever seen a dude that sweat as much as Patrick Ewing? I remember that he had like his own personal sweat mopper upper after every free throw he took. I can't recall another player having a dude like that. You and I have been pretty open about the fact that we sort of grew up a little after the golden age of Patrick Ewing. I think my first season really paying attention to the Knicks was when I was like 9 years old, and it was the 98-99 season and, the finals run, but he was largely not a part of that once it hit the finals run part. But having watched old tape of him, yeah, he's a prolific sweater. I think the only guys that I can really think of, at least for me, and you had a different guy, but there's a common theme among all these guys that we listed. I said Jordan and Shaq. I can remember sweating a ton, and when you watch videos of them, they're just like drenched in sweat, but they're bald. And I think that obviously then there's no buffer, there's nothing to catch all that sweat. So of course you're going to look way sweatier than the other guys on the court if you're bald. And I feel like we don't see as much of that now in the current NBA because of the fact that everybody seems resistant to going bald anymore. Like that's just not a cool look anymore, I guess. So like you've got LeBron and like Fournier and all these other guys getting hair plugs just to avoid the appearance of being bald. So nobody's really embracing that shave bald look anymore, which I think has led to less sweat on the court. But like Patrick Ewing was never bald. He always had the flat top and yet always managed to produce that. I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that, he's up on Mount Sweatmore as far as like the top guy, maybe just him alone on Mount Sweatmore, or maybe him and three bald guys, maybe Jordan, Shaq, and the guy that you're about to mention. But I mean, yeah, I think that he stands alone as far as guys with hair that sweat as much as he did.
Yeah, I had Kevin Garnett as my one guy. I mean, someone who would literally be like dripping with sweat by the time the national anthem went on. And I think the common theme of all these guys was there was just an intensity there, right? I think it was this desperation to win over all else. And I mean, for KG, like he was literally banging his head against the stanchion before the start of games. Like I'm sure like MJ was working himself into a fervor, like Shaq and Ewing, great competitors in their own right. So maybe it's the baldness plus the competitiveness, because we're talking about, and part of it is that you just remember the great players more, right? Like I'm sure there've been a lot of mediocre guys who've sweat a lot, but there might be something to greatness and excessive sweating. I will certainly look into it as someone who is trying to achieve greatness himself. Maybe I'm not. I almost never sweat during this podcast, so clearly I'm not working hard enough. But do you have a final point there, Alex, or you want to wrap it up?
I was gonna say, also got to consider minute load here.
Yeah, that's a factor.
That definitely leads to sweat. So that's why the superstars are probably the most memorable. I also wanted to give an honorable mention. The more I was thinking about it, Steve Nash, like during his prime Suns years when he was playing so many minutes, like he would get out of games looking like he'd just taken a shower. And he had so much hair that like you didn't see as much of the sweat, but like, I mean, his hair was like drenched by the end of those games when he was with the Suns during the prime, like 7 seconds or less era. Because that was like a 35-year-old dude, like running up and down the floor like a maniac and keeping up with Amari Stoudemire, who was like 22 at the time. So, yeah, I think Steve Nash maybe gets an honorable mention here as an underrated sweater. I think this week we'll be back with it. We're going to be talking about Fournier, among other topics as far as like team building and things of that nature. So that's all coming up on the next edition of Locked On Knicks. Actually, probably 2 editions because we're also going to have a game recap for you guys too. But until next time, thanks, and we will talk to you guys all soon. Peace out.